Okay, so actually, just a little bit about myself. I'm getting a little older, as you can tell, the gray hair, etc. But I was born in 1962, before the internet age, and that's actually a picture of myself when I was about 10 months old. And I always asked my mother, why in the world did you have me in some sort of like a jailhouse suit, right? Was it a forecast of what I would end up becoming? And unfortunately, I've never worn one of those suits. But, you know, it's really interesting that myself and probably many of you folks in this room actually grew up, or part of your youth, there was no such thing as the internet. And when we came home from school, what did we do? We went out and we played ball, and, you know, we chased the girls, and we played hide and seek, you know, until late into the night. And, you know, today's youth is much, much different than what it was when we grew up. And so, you know, after I got out of high school, I did a stint in the United States Army, and I spent several years active duty in the Army, and then many, many years in the National Guard as well. But for me, when I graduated from college in 1989 with a degree in engineering, I did not want to spend my career working in defense contracting. Because in the United States back in 1989, anybody with an engineering degree went to go work for Rockwell or Boeing or somebody like that. And I did not want to spend the rest of my career writing code for Sparrow missile systems or something, right? And so I quickly decided that I was not going to go after those opportunities. As a matter of fact, I had two really nice opportunities upon graduating from college. But I did not want to go into that field. One of the reasons why is because my father, another military man, he was a telephone guy back in the day. And tip and ring, I don't know if you remember anybody saying that before, but it was, you know, wires, and he was a telephone guy up on poles, etc. But in 1989, I quickly realized that I wanted to get into this thing that didn't even really have a name yet. And it was called the internet. And back in those days, it was still really referred to as ARPANET here in the United States. And so, you know, really, what year was it for you when you first became aware of the internet? Or the first time you logged in? The first time you opened up a browser, right? Anybody remember what the very first browser was? Mosaic, right? And then shortly thereafter, Netscape. Before it was all using Gopher, right? I remember using Gopher, right? And accessing these websites and these universities. Using something where all it was just file systems that you could look at. And then I remember the first browser came along, right? Mosaic. And then Netscape. And I remember AOL, right? Back in the United States, that's how you got on the internet, was dial-up access AOL. And so I remember dialing up on AOL, getting my hands on Mosaic so I could download Netscape. And that was my first experience with the internet. And so I remember I'm not sure if any of you could see that picture very well. But I remember my first job out of college, I went to go work for a company called Liebert. Anybody ever hear of Liebert Corporation? If you've ever been in a data center, you're going to see Liebert in there most likely because they create air conditioning, power systems for data centers. And when I walked into Liebert, they had a big giant 3090 mainframe. We had twin-X cables going through the ceilings that were literally, the ceilings were sagging because of so much weight from the cables. And I remember telephone rooms were something like that, right? Where you had these punch-down blocks and all these wires, and you know, you had to learn the color code of these wires and all this other stuff. And when I walked in the door of Liebert, it was very evident to me we were going to go through a major change in the next 5 years. And I remember after that, 5 years later, going into that same computer room with a big giant 3090 in there, and literally we had one rack with servers in there and an AS400 sitting next to it. And it was just the entire, you could play a game of basketball inside of that computer room after all the computers were once removed. And so, what year was it for you when you first became aware of the internet? And also think about how it's changed dramatically just in the last 2 to 3 years alone. And how we do business across the internet. You know, I'm a big advocate of social networking and social marketing, and today that's a huge avenue for organizations like yourselves to reach the people that are in such dire need of the expertise that you folks can provide. So who would have known that, you know, we're talking about back in 1981, 100 nodes on the internet, hosts on the internet, and then years later, back in 2009, we're almost to 1 billion hosts on the internet. And who would have known back then that would have grown so dramatically as it has done today? And now when we're talking about the Internet of Things, how's that going to look in 5 years from now? There's so many different devices on the internet. So many different things on the internet today. And then something happened to me. So after my stint with Liebert, I left the company and I really wanted to get into more involvement in the internet. So I went to start working for a company called Cascade Communications. And back in those days, Cascade Communications built hardware that helped build the backbone of the internet in the United States. So I literally spent 10 years of my career, almost 10 years, about 8.5 years of my career, building the backbone of the internet in the United States. I worked for Cascade, I worked for Ascend, and I worked for Lucent back in those days. Cascade built ATM frame, MPLS switches, Ascend built all the RAS boxes, which are all dial access, 56K modems. And you know, it just amazed me back then how things were changing so dramatically. And you know, we have a funny story back in the United States. We always say, you know, Al Gore was the one that invented the internet, but I was one of the guys that actually built the internet, built the backbone of the internet in the United States. So nights, holidays, weekends, when everybody else was having fun, I was standing in a central office. Let me go back one. I was standing in a central office, just like that young gentleman right there, firing up the technology that actually helped build the backbone in the United States. And back in those days, I remember the very first, you know what the very first website I saw? It was an X-rated website. And I was thinking, wait a second, things are going to really get strange here. And then in the year 2000, myself and about 1 million other engineers in the United States found ourselves out of work. It wasn't because of anything we failed to do. It was because the project was complete. We built the backbone of the internet in the United States. And like any other good engineer, what do? You move on and go do something else. And I was sitting in my office. It was basically May 5th, year 2000. Anybody remember what day that was? It was the I Love You virus day. And although viral in nature, that I Love You virus had the ability of taking down portions of the internet. Back in that early days, right? And I remember seeing all the emails going across the internet and everything else. Although, again, viral, it was very evident to me. We have built something that is extremely vulnerable. And myself, I'm a DDoS subject matter expert, and we'll talk a little bit more about DDoS today and what that means to the internet. But it was just a dramatic awakening back in that year 2000. And I basically dedicated the rest of my career so far into going back and helping secure what we created in the United States and abroad. And so, you know, I love the capabilities of the internet, but I also understand the vulnerabilities that we've created because of the internet as well. Now today, upwards of, you know, January 13th, we're at about almost 1.2 billion different domains on the internet. But as a result of this, again, what have we created? Something that is very, very vulnerable because of the way we've begun to rely on it. Now, anybody in this room can live without a smartphone, live without a laptop, live without Wi-Fi today. And we might be able to because of our age. But when you look at the youth, they have no idea what it's even like to not even have the internet. So really what's at stake here? Well, you know, we're all security professionals in here, right? And we all understand the CIA triad. Confidentiality, integrity, and what's the third one? Availability. And so today, what's at really stake here, and the attackers are understanding this very dramatically, is that if we can take away your availability, confidentiality and integrity doesn't mean anything else, right? It doesn't matter. If your files are confident, that's great. If you feel that the integrity of your data is complete, that's fine, fantastic. But if you cannot get to your data, that's the end of the game. And so, having the best firewalls in the world, and having the best antivirus, and having the best username, password controls, etc., etc., it doesn't make any difference because the attackers today are becoming very, very wise to the ways of still taking you offline. So really, what is at stake? Its availability is at stake. So who's vulnerable? Now again, I want to kind of shift this focus right now and focus more on availability, because that's where I work and live and breathe, because I did not spend 10 years of my career building the backbone of the internet in the United States for somebody to just take it away. And we all today know we're becoming vulnerable to this. So let me ask you this question. Do DDoS attacks work? Yes. They work very well. And if they didn't work, would anybody waste their time building a big botnet and doing all these other things? Absolutely not. They know it works. And so, for instance, who's vulnerable? Well, Akamai says the internet's faster, DDoS attacks are increasing. These are just headlines for the last 6 months. Also, DDoS attacks rise as companies fail to address the DNS security issues out there. Another one, record-breaking DDoS attack in Europe hits 400 gig. How did somebody generate 400 gig of DDoS traffic? We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. The attackers up in the way they use DDoS attacks, right? Today we see a lot of what? Extortion is a DDoS attack. You know, I'm going to launch a DDoS attack against you, send you a nice, colorful email, ask for $250,000 for an offshore account, and maybe I'll actually stop the DDoS attack. And so the attackers are also using DDoS as what? We know it as smoke screens, right? You're sitting there focusing on this DDoS attack. You're reducing your security by saying, okay, just let it go, let it go. And next thing you know, compromised systems, data exfiltration, etc. So we know what the end game there. DDoS attack. Is regulation the answer? You know, there's a lot of buzz going on in the United States right now from some of the cybersecurity professionals out there that say, look, maybe it's time to regulate the internet. Or at least be able to regulate the attack traffic that's going across the internet. Because at the end of the day, the internet is just a really, really dirty pipe. Another one here, DDoS attacks, bigger, badder, nastier than last year. And again, what are these attacking? Are they attacking confidentiality? No. Integrity? No. What are they attacking? It's availability of the internet. This cross-site scripting vulnerability in Sohu.com, right? That's like Netflix over on the other side of the world in Asia, where you basically went to this site, you could actually be participating in a DDoS attack completely unknowingly. Another one here, new federal rule in the United States requires banks to fight DDoS attack. Who remembers 2012 in the United States? And again, oh, you folks, again, I'm on the other side of the world here, but to us here, in the United States, Izzadin Al-Qassam, the freedom fighter group back in 2012, took down every single major bank in the United States for a certain period of time. And they knew what the equation was, and they knew how to pull these attacks off. And so now, the federal rules, basically, regulation is starting to hit the financial organizations in the United States and saying, you've got to solve this problem. We consider this critical infrastructure, and you've got to solve this problem. Now, here in this country, is finance critical infrastructure in this country? Absolutely, it probably is. S&P could be the future of DDoS attacks. Today we are seeing a completely different vector of attack out there. In the old days, it was the network level flood. I'm going to SYN flood you, I'm going to get a big giant botnet, and it's going to be highly spoofed, I'm going to target you directly, and I'm going to launch a big giant SYN flood against you. But today what we're seeing is that 70% of the attacks we're seeing are not necessarily those big giant botnet SYN flood attacks. What we're seeing today is reflected amplified attacks. And for example, the way a reflected amplified attack works, how do you generate 400 gig of DDoS traffic? It's very simple. Say for example, Max here. He works for a company, I'm a hacker, I find out his DNS infrastructure, I know the IP addresses of it. Next thing I do, I conscript a little tiny botnet, I hit the 27 million DNS open resolvers out there using your source address. All of a sudden, all those DNS resolvers respond with a very large DNS response, not coming back to me, Mr. Botnet Master. They're coming back to Max's network because I'm spoofing his source address. That's how you can generate 400 gig of traffic. The reflected amplified types of DDoS attacks are a serious threat to the backbones of these internets. When you're talking about, I guarantee within the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see a terabit DDoS attack somewhere in this world. You can use a whole list of NTP, or excuse me, a whole list of UDP protocols can be used to launch reflected amplified types of DDoS attacks. From DNS, NTP, SNMP, quote of the day, believe it or not, quote of the day. And as a matter of fact, US CERT lists an entire whole list of UDP protocols that can be used to launch an amplified type of DDoS attack. So what's a great analogy for a reflected amplified DDoS attack? It's a ping pong game. I hit the little tiny white ball across the net and all of a sudden 3,000 basketballs come back. Bigger balls and a whole lot more of them. And that's just one or two categories of attacks. The categories of attacks today in the world of availability are very broad. And these attackers are developing new methodologies, new techniques to bring systems down all the time. Massive DDoS attack launched from anti-DDoS servers. This is interesting. A company up in Canada is an anti-DDoS cloud scrubbing provider. Their servers became compromised, had some of the most massive horsepower, massive bandwidth. Guess what? They're being used to launch a DDoS attack against somebody else. Remember last night we were talking about what? Detection. If you can't detect something, how can you prevent it? They couldn't obviously detect this, and they obviously didn't prevent it. TypePad claims it was hit by another DDoS attack. Meetup, Basecamp, Vimeo, Bitly. These companies have all fallen to these types of attacks. Another one. On-site gambling, or online gambling site hit by a 5-vector DDoS attack. Meaning, they were probably coming under a SYN flood, or an ACK push flood, or some sort of combination. They were probably using a reflected amplified NTP or DNS attack. They were hitting them with a fragmented attack as well, because that melts down anything to a deep packet inspection. They were also probably hammering them with application layer DDoS attacks as well. And probably at the end of the day, okay, good. At the end of the day, they were probably utilizing specially crafted packets as well. So again, I'm not going to go through every one of these, but as you can see, this problem represents a serious threat to the internet. Let me ask you this. You folks are all cybersecurity experts, right? And you're advising your customers, telling them what to do. They look at you as the educated advisor. Have any of you ever downloaded a DDoS tool, saw how it worked, took it into your lab? Show of hands. How many? Excellent. Good, 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 good. Because I tell you, I asked the same question over in the US, and it's crickets. That's all I hear is crickets. Nobody's hands goes up. Which really, really, is concerning. So how are we all connected? You wouldn't believe how many times I asked the general person on the street. I said, what would happen if somebody came over here in the United States and just cut all those wires right there on those underground cables? Would the internet go down in the United States? Well, they say, no, the satellites. We go by satellite. I said, really? You believe that the internet is running over the satellites? There's less than 1% of the internet's traffic that's going over satellites. There's actually copper, or it's not copper, it used to be copper in the day, right, Max? Now it's all fiber. These fibers run. They just take these big boats or these big spool of wires, they take these fibers all the way across the ocean, they're laying across the ocean. We were talking about it last night. The sharks are now biting on the actual cables. The shark will probably eat just about anything. And think about it. Could you take down the internet in the United States? Well, if you severed all of these links right here, yeah, you could take down the internet in the United States. Although I might be able to talk to the guy next door to me. But our financial markets would go down. We'd have to shut them down. We couldn't even do any international trades. Let me ask you this. This country right here, or the country up north, right? Many of you folks might have been from Germany or coming to here from Switzerland. Let me ask you this. How vulnerable is this country? Is there one place where the internet comes in? Or are there 5 places where it comes in? Or are there 50 places where it comes in? 1,000 places where it comes in? Does anybody know? And if somebody could potentially hit that spot where these links were coming in, could you drop the internet in this country? What effect would that have to this country? I know what it would do to the United States. I'd probably have everybody that was under 30 years old jumping out of their windows because they couldn't check their Facebook. Right? Remember the stock market crash right back in the 20s, right? 1920s or whatever. People were jumping out of the windows of these big high-rise buildings in New York City. It would be the same thing. So, today, what is the internet like? It's every man for themselves. Every company has to figure out how they're going to secure themselves from all of this cyber threat. And let me ask you this. Are these people that are doing all this attacking, are they just children, script kiddies? Or are they criminals? Very simple, they're criminals. If I come into the middle of the night and I cut a big giant hole, in an alley, I come down an alley and I cut a big giant hole in the back of the bank, bust the bricks down, and then next thing you know, I cut a big giant hole in the safe, and I steal all the money in the safe. Is that a crime? No, it's called bank robbery. In the United States, you get 30 years in prison. But if I do it electronically, is it a crime? It's still a crime. But what's the sentencing like? A slap on the hand sometimes, or a slap on the wrist. And so today, every man has got to figure out, every company has got to figure out for themselves. And you know what the result of that is? Infected systems, infected networks, downtime, impact to our economy. If you do a study right now and ask and figure out how much does the world spend on cybersecurity in 1 year alone, some of the estimates are, some of the experts are actually estimating $800 billion is being spent just to defend against this cyber threat. And that's the result of an unsecure internet. That is the result of an unsecure internet. So, who can help with this problem? Well, Carrero, we are in a major push right now to communicate to the service providers around the world and say, you know something? You guys are part of the problem. Because you are allowing all of this attack traffic to traverse your network and take companies down, and you're basically washing your hands of the problem. It's not our problem. And so we're trying to promote to the service providers around the world, start taking some responsibility for the traffic that's traversing your network. If it's nothing but DDoS traffic going across your network, is it your responsibility to just eliminate that? And as a result, what we're afraid of in the United States is this nasty thing right here, regulation. We do not want to see the internet become regulated in the U.S. But what's going to happen if these ISPs do not begin cleaning up their act? We're talking about lawsuits. 5 minutes, gotcha. We're talking about lawsuits, we're talking about, all kinds of different things that can come from this. Hey, you were the one that actually allowed that traffic across your network. It took me down. I lost millions of dollars. Can I go after you in the court of law? Potentially. We'll see. We'll see very soon. Let me ask you this. If somebody in this country said, look, I'm going to sell you an internet pipe, and that pipe I'm going to guarantee through my SLA is not going to have any DDoS traffic on it. Now, the malware stuff is more difficult to do, right? Max, I'd say, yeah, probably a little more difficult. DDoS is pretty easy to stop because you know what it is. Would anybody pay for it? Would you be willing to pay a premium? Would your customers be willing to pay a premium? I don't know. And right now, the business models, people are, the economists over in the U.S. are trying to figure out the business models and saying, would actually somebody be willing to pay for a premium internet? Myself, right? I live in Jacksonville, Florida. I've got Comcast as my provider. I have a 50 meg pipe coming into my home. And you would not believe all of the probes and scans and attacks that I constantly receive every single day. I have Carrero's technology actively protecting my home network. And the reason being is because I don't want it coming in. But literally, I would pay extra for Comcast to just eliminate that traffic right off the bat. I don't want it. It's not here. They're not coming to my house to do business with me. They're just here to attack me. And so that's a great question to think about in the future. Would people be willing to pay for cleaner bandwidth? So what's the recommendation? Number one, visibility. We must have visibility of what is coming in and out of our networks at the packet level. Is this attack traffic? Is this DDoS traffic? Is this a layer 7 attack? Is this a fragmented attack? Is it a reflected amplified type of attack? What is it? And without having the visibility, and again, firewalls are not providing the visibility that was required today to determine whether I'm on attack or not. Plan. You need to go back, my personal opinion is, go back and talk to your customers and ask them, do you have a DDoS response plan in place? I ask this question all the time to my audiences. I did yesterday, as a matter of fact, when I was speaking downstairs. There's almost 25 people in my room. I asked the room, right? These were all end users. I asked them, how many people have a DDoS response plan? You know what the answer was? None. 0. I didn't get a single hand that went up. Vigilance. As the attack vectors change, remain vigilant. Share. Share the information. Share who's attacking you. Tell the world, these guys are DDoS attackers, this is where it's coming from, these are the botnet infected machines, and they need to be eliminated from the internet. So what's the solution today? Well, really, it's going to take a combination of technologies. It's going to take, in concert with folks like you, in concert with the service providers, the technology manufacturers, to be able to defeat this problem. Now, I know I'm almost out of time, so I'm not going to go through that. But how can you learn more about Carrero and DDoS in general? Well, number one, info@carrero.com. You can download this or ask for a presentation. If you ever want to do a technical deep dive and say, Steve, tell me more about DDoS, tell me more about technology that defeats DDoS, I would love to do that by a webinar or even coming back over here and doing it in person. I've got tons of videos on securitybistro.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter. Well, I'm out of time, right? Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.